Welcome everyone, this will be my review of the first episode of the Netflix show The Sandman, where I will cover all the Easter eggs and the differences between the comics and the show. If you're brand new to the channel, I'll be doing more of these, so make sure to subscribe, and of course, heads up for the spoilers if you haven't seen episode 1 yet. We'll start at the beginning and work our way through, shot by shot. The Sandman episode 1 begins with a beautiful tour through the world and then into the dream realm known as the Dreaming, which is Morpheus' kingdom through the eyes of his raven companion Jessamy. Couple of Easter eggs and references I want to highlight from the intro. I want to spend a little time talking about the gates of horn and ivory that we see at the beginning. They are a wonderful literary reference and they actually hold significant meaning in the realm of the Dreaming. The Dreaming is infinite, however, it's bounded by two gates, the gates of horn and the gates of ivory. Those gates were carved by Morpheus himself when the world was young to set some order. This reference dates back at least to Greek and Roman mythology, referred to by Homer in the Odyssey and Virgil in the Aeneid, as you can see from these quotes. True dreams exit through the gates of horn, and false dreams through the gates of ivory. And the show did absolutely a wonderful job depicting the gates. This literary image and the phrase gates of horn and ivory originated in the Greek language, in which the word for horn is similar to that for fulfill, and the word for ivory is similar to that for deceive. So on the basis of that play on words, true dreams are spoken of as coming through the gates of horn, and false dreams as coming through those of ivory. In the intro, we also spot the Gatekeepers of the Dreaming, three creatures who take the form of a wyvern, a griffin, and a hippogriff. They are charged with guarding the entrance to Dream's palace and notifying their master of visitors. After Morpheus will be captured, they will be weakened and lose their ability to guard the palace or protect the Dreaming. Marvin Pumpkinhead and Martin Tenbones make brief appearances in the opening montage of the Dreaming as well. In the comic, Mervyn made his first silent cameo in issue 5, corresponding to episode 4, and Martin Tenbones first appeared in issue 15, corresponding to the later episodes of the season. They will be properly introduced in later episodes, so we won't spend much time on them now. In the intro, we also briefly meet our main character Morpheus, played by Tom Sturridge, who does a brilliant job by the way, who is the king of dreams and nightmares. He goes by many names, and throughout the video I'll refer to him as either Dream, Sandman, or Morpheus. And Sandman leaves the Dreaming in hunt of a rogue nightmare called Corinthian, armed with his pouch of sand, his helm, and his ruby, which are his tokens of powers, but we'll get back to those in a bit. Even though the episode could do without this intro, since there's a lot of telling the story instead of showing it and allowing the world to breathe, the main purpose of the intro is to set the stage for the casual viewer and to highlight the contrast between the two versions of the Dreaming. The state it is in right now, at its peak, a bright and colorful realm, and the one we will see at the end of the episode after Morpheus has been gone for a century. It's easier to comprehend the gravity of the situation at the end of the episode after previously seeing the Dreaming in this state. So while the intro can feel a bit out of place and it seems rushed, it's actually under 3 minutes long, so potentially it's a good trade-off between giving the new viewers information and letting everyone see the beautiful adaptation of the Dreaming. After the intro, we kick it off with the way the number 1 issue of the comic starts. The first issue of the comic begins and ends with the same shot of the house and those same words, "Wake up, we're here." The show only uses it as an opener. The actual title of the episode, Sleep of the Just, is another reference. If you do some research, you'll find that the Sleep of the Just is an Elvis Costello song, but that's unlikely to be the main reference. Gaiman is very likely also referring to the Jean Racine, the French playwright, with his quote, which translated means, "She slept the sleep of the just." This line shows up in the actual issue referring to Wesley Dodds, who is DC's first Sandman. The Sandman was originally published in 1939, before Gaiman released the story in 1989 that would become the Sandman epic that is being adapted in this show. The original was focused on Wesley Dodds, who was a more standard superhero than Morpheus, so that's another more important part of the reference here. We very quickly meet a couple of characters important to the plot of the first episode. First, we met Dr. John Hathaway, who we will shortly find out is the senior curator of the Royal Museum. We also get the first appearance of Roderick Burgess, who we will shortly find out is Lord Magus. Magus is just Latinized singular of mage, something of an equivalent to a wizard or a magician. He is the founder of the Order of Ancient Mysteries. And we meet Alex Burgess, son of Roderick Burgess, who greets Hathaway at the door. Shortly after, we see Ruthven Sykes, second in command of the Order of Ancient Mysteries, but he plays a larger role in the comics than in this episode. After Dr. Hathaway's son, Edmund, died in battle, he agreed to remove a powerful book of magic from the Royal Museum and give it to Burgess, and in exchange he expected Burgess to use the book to return his dead son to him. Burgess claimed he only lacked this book to complete a spell he claimed would summon and imprison death, which would enable Burgess to resurrect his son. That particular book of magic is called Magdalene Grimoire, A grimoire is just a fancy word for a magical book, and even though, due to the way it's spelled, one might pronounce it as Magdalene Grimoire, but as it was confirmed by Neil Gaiman, it's not a reference to the biblical Mary Magdalene, and it's pronounced Molden in British usage. Burgess also desires to bring Randal, his first son, back to life and seems driven by grief as much as lust for power. However, there's no mention of his dead son in the comics, so this is something entirely unique to the show. After that, ritual is about to take place, and just before the ritual starts, we cut to Berlin, Germany, where we meet the Corinthian. The Corinthian is a nightmare created by Dream, which escaped the Dreaming, the Sandman's kingdom. In the comic, he didn't escape into the waking world until after Dream's capture. The most notable shift from the comics and the way the story is told in the show is the role of the Corinthian. In the comics, he's not introduced until issue 10, which is part of the Doll's House arc, which makes up the second half of the season. However, Sandman's primary story isn't told in a linear way, and it was never going to be an easy comic to adapt. And introducing the Corinthian here does make a lot of sense, both in terms of building an arc for the show and adding some tension as well. Essentially, it's actually the Corinthian who's the primary antagonist in the first episode, and judging by the end trailer, the entire first season. And right before Sandman can get rid of Corinthian, instead of capturing Death, Roderick Burgess mistakenly traps Dream. In comics, Sandman attended a significant event far from Earth, and this event and the lengthy journey back had weakened him significantly, and he was returning in a vulnerable condition and was captured. It was only because of this vulnerability that the spell cast by Burgess was able to capture him. These events prior to the capture are explored more directly in the Sandman Overture and are not covered in this episode here. Even though Overture is technically a prequel, it's still recommended you read it after getting past the core series and volumes. After Dream's capture, we can see his symbols of power, the Helm, the Sand Pouch, and the Dream Ruby. The first DC comic character to bear the name the Sandman, Wesley Dodds, who we mentioned earlier, wore a gas mask. So when creating the new version of the character, Neil Gaiman wanted a visual tribute to that gas mask. So he created metal, leather, and bone gas mask essentially made out of a spine. The helmet was crafted by Dream from the spine and skull of a god a long time ago, and he used it as one of his 3 symbols of office. However, given that many artists who worked on the Sandman comics would draw the helmet differently, it became a problem when they had to make one for the Netflix show because there were so many versions. But eventually they picked the one J.H. Williams III had drawn in the Sandman Overture, and that's the version of the helmet we see in this show. We clearly see here the removal of the helmet, ruby, and pouch of sand. The thing about Dream's item, particularly the ruby, is that they're extremely powerful and not meant for mortals to use. Ruby is especially powerful since it allows the owner to see dreams and bring them into reality. And the recovery of these symbols of power will occupy us for the upcoming episodes, as it will be a priority for Morpheus to recover these items. The recovery of the ruby is covered in episode 5 of the Netflix show called 24/7, which is based on a comic issue number 6 called 24 Hours. Now that's a story you don't easily forget, but we'll get to that in the upcoming episode. And finally, the sand in the sand pouch can put others to sleep and is capable of releasing dreams into the real world. With Morpheus separated from his realm, people start to get sick in the waking world, either falling permanently unconscious or never sleeping at all. However, we only get a very short glimpse into the effect of Dream's imprisonment on our world. The episode failed to reflect on the surrounding world and what happens in Dream's absence. It tells us something along the lines of all the pain that it caused to the world, but we as the viewer can't be aware of it because it simply doesn't show how horrible it gets, not in the way the comic does. We are introduced to Unity Kinkaid, and this won't be the last time we reference her this season, and she's also affected by this sleeping sickness, and the sleepy sickness affected nearly 1 million men, women, and children. On the right hand side, we can see a doll's house, perhaps a very literal reference to the doll's house, aka the second volume of the Sandman, which season 1 is set to adapt alongside the first volume of the series, Preludes and Nocturnes. Neil Gaiman actually worked in a real-world event into the story that happened during the First World War. Between approximately 1916 and the early 1930s, an epidemic of Encephalitis Lethargica spread throughout the world, and it's believed that more than 1 million people were afflicted with the condition, which left people lethargic, comatose, or delirious. Something else also different compared to the original material is that Corinthian tracks down Roderick Burgess and gives him advice on how to keep Dream captive, since if Dream escapes, he'll come for them both. This is where the viewers also get informed that the Sandman is a 10 billion-year-old member of the Endless, a family of anthropomorphic personifications of universal forces consisting of destiny, desire, despair, destruction, delirium, and death, even though only desire, destiny, and despair are referenced in this episode. The Endless spend most of their time fulfilling their functions as embodiments of natural forces. For example, Death leads the soul of the dead away from the realm of the living, while Dream oversees the realm of dreams and imagination, the dreaming. On top of all that, the Endless are a dysfunctional family and do not often get along with each other. It will become more clear through different episodes and seasons what their function and purpose is, but stay tuned, we'll also cover the Endless in a separate video. A decade passes, and Randal Burgess has become rich and influential thanks in part to his use of Dream's totems of power, the Helm, Ruby, and Pouch of Sand. After this, there's a good chunk of the episode that absolutely does not align with the source material, but the tropes and plotlines set in place at the beginning of the episode now have to be completed and resolved. Burgess' son, Alex, has grown up to resent his cruel, vindictive father. It's evident that Roderick is abusive and resents his son Alex for not being Randal. He pressures Alex into killing Jessamy, Dream's raven, which he does accomplish one day shooting the bird as it attempts to free Dream from his cage. Jessamy the raven is Matthew's predecessor. In the comic, we don't know why she's no longer around or what happened to her. Here, she's killed on screen, shot dead by Alex while trying to free Dream from prison. When Alex shoots Jessamy dead in front of the glass prison, Roderick scolds him since the glass could have been cracked by the shot, so we have a bit of foreshadowing as well. Roderick's mistress Ethel Cripps reveals she's pregnant with his child, and forced to not have the baby, she steals Dream's Helm, Ruby, and Pouch of Sand before running away from the Burgess home. In comics, she actually runs away with Ruthven Sykes, second in command of the Order of Ancient Mysteries. Also, Ethel has blonde hair in the series, and she has dark hair in the comic. However, staying true to the source material, she did give birth to Johnny as she refers to him in the episode, and decades later she will give him the ruby she stole from Dream, and that's why we'll meet Johnny again in episode 5 and we'll see who he became when him and Sandman battle it out for this irreplaceable ruby. However, Ethel stealing Dream's item pushes Roderick over the edge and he demands Dream speak to him and help him find her. Dream still refuses to speak, which makes Roderick lose his temper, taking it out on his son Alex. The two get in a scuffle that results in Roderick falling backward and hitting his head on Dream's cage, killing him almost instantly. Roderick Burgess wasn't the most loving father in the comic, but in the show he was openly abusive towards Alex. But the main point in the comics is that Burgess died from old age while begging Dream for eternal life. He died a pathetic death after wasting his life trying to pursue immortality. That's the irony of his existence. On Roderick's tombstone in the comic, we find the words, "not dead, only sleeping," and this is a reference to Luke 8:52, when Jesus brings a dead girl back to life. It seems strange that an occultist like Roderick would have appropriated a Bible verse for his tombstone. It has to do with his hopes of being saved from death even once he has succumbed to it. And that's his final tragedy. Even after his death, he still believes he can escape it. It's also a nice touch as this also refers to those who have fallen ill to the sleepy sickness because they're not dead either, only sleeping, and the phrase also suggests that Morpheus will escape. He's not dead, his imprisonment will prove only temporary. However, back to the Netflix show, Alex sympathizes with Dream throughout the episode because he feels just as trapped by his father's disregard and claims that he would let Dream out if he could. Even after accidentally killing his father, Alex hesitates to release Dream. He later offers to release Dream and, unlike the comic, doesn't ask for wealth or immortality, but simply for Dream to leave him and his love interest Paul alone and not hurt them. Dream doesn't believe him anymore since he killed his raven. And it's actually not until Alex is an old man himself that Dream finally manages to escape his cage. In the original comic, Alex's boyfriend Paul accidentally smudges the circle markings around Dream's cell without noticing or realizing what he's done. But in this adaptation, he's shown noticing what he's done and giving Dream a look that says he's deliberately giving him a way out, and implying that in return, he hopes that Dream won't kill Alex. We have another Easter egg here. We see one of the guards is reading Stephen King's It, just like in the comics. This book deals with the theme of childhood trauma, potentially referring to Alex Burgess becoming an old man and still living with the trauma of his childhood. However, Morpheus is able to use what Paul has done to manipulate one of the guards. He reaches into the guard's dream, or potentially even a daydream, and grabs a handful of sand. This is a power he will manifest many times. Morpheus uses the sand to put his creator to sleep, and this is also a traditional power of the children's tale Sandman. So he forces the guard to shoot his gun and break the glass. The way Morpheus escapes is identical to the comics, it's only inverted. Before he leaves for the dreaming, Dream condemns Alex to an eternal and presumably torturous sleep, and Paul is last seen begging for his partner to wake up. Dream's punishment for Alex in the comics was to be constantly waking up from nightmares only to realize he's still dreaming over and over forever. Now that's so scary, and in the comics it makes you respect the creative power of Dream and his wrath. And these details are important. It showed Dream's true power, his temper, and how he could hold onto a grudge. It's supposed to be unsettling, it's supposed to be a peek into the dark side of his character, but in the show, Dream just condemns Alex to eternal sleep. It still goes to show to the viewers that Sandman may be wise and broadly speaking good, but he can also be frightening and vengeful, and this will play a crucial part in the character development arc later on. But I just think a lot of fans were disappointed with the punishment being eternal sleep instead of eternal waking as it was in the comics. However, it's not that the creators haven't tried. Neil Gaiman tweeted out they tried to do eternal waking, but it didn't work for the pacing of the show. But still, for me, the eternal waking punishment is one of the coolest moments in the first issue, so it's personally one of the bigger disappointments of the episode. The episode overall takes place over a longer time span than the comic, specifically in that Morpheus' imprisonment lasts an extra 3 decades, so 100 years in total, so that the rest of the series can take place in the present day as opposed to in what was the present day when the comic was published 3 decades ago. How Alex and his partner are not dead yet is not explained directly, but it can be assumed that the ruby extended Alex's life as well before it was stolen from Roderick. It's a bit of a stretch, but it's also more of a practical matter for the show to take place in the present day. However, more importantly, in my opinion, the amount of time that passed wasn't perceivable in the episode. Morpheus' character gets built as the decades roll by. His patience, sitting silently waiting for a mistake to be made, that's what makes it clear what it means to be one of the Endless. He's unmoving, he's uncompromising because of his sense of duty, and that really didn't come through in the episode. So when he finally gets his chance to exact cold vengeance on Alex, the passion just isn't there, because you don't feel that build-up, that culmination of Dream waiting for 100 years to escape. How the pace of time is handled was a big part of what fans loved about the comics and even the audiobook, but here in the show it just wasn't as satisfying when Dream escaped. This quiet experience of sitting in a basement for 100 years or 72 years in the comics has a profound effect on the Sandman, and hopefully the show will explore that properly later as well. And now, Dream is finally free to return to his domain, but the dreaming is not as he left it. He reunites with the realm's chief librarian Lucienne, who informs him that the things have fallen into disarray since he's been gone. Most of the dreams have left, either in search of him, decayed, or believed that Dream had abandoned them. The dreaming, formerly a bright and colorful realm, decayed in his absence because Morpheus and the realm are intimately connected. Lucienne's character has also been gender swapped. In the comics we have Lucienne, which is derived from French for light, and in the TV show we have Lucienne. Another change compared to the comics is Lucienne finding Dream instead of Gregory, the gargoyle. It was far more emotional and less silly, so it made sense. However, we will still be introduced to the gargoyle in episode 2 as well. Now that everything's in chaos, Dream fears what will happen if dreams and nightmares are running around preying on the waking world, such as Corinthian. And speaking of Corinthian, toward the end of the episode we see him in an apartment with his latest victim. He's a serial killer known for his trademark of killing people by cutting out their eyes. He knows Dream has escaped and now he must take action. The Corinthian is generally also an impeccable dresser and will often wear only white clothing, but his most notable physical feature is his lack of eyes. In their place, in each eye socket he has 2 rows of small teeth like tiny mouths, which he often hides with sunglasses. And that's how the episode 1 ends. It goes into a bunch more stuff than the comics opening and mixes in some stuff that appeared later, but it does make sense for the TV show format and sets up a bunch of things for non-book readers. Several side plots from the comic book story are left out of the episode to focus on the main plot, including the fates of the man who supplied Burgess with the Grimoire and of Burgess's assistant Mr. Sykes, and shows only Unity Kinkaid suffering from the sleepy sickness instead of the half dozen in the comic. First time after watching the episode, I wasn't sure what to think. In all of Neil Gaiman's writing, he always expects his readers to be as smart as him about various mythologies, DC comic history, writers and poets, etc., and he doesn't explain the little stuff. You either get it or just skip it and keep on reading, and that's what makes it special. Of course, there's a depth the comics provide that's hard to match in television, and it helps to realize the show isn't the same as the comics because it's the show. I went into it wanting it to make the same impression on me as reading it did, but that's impossible. You have to be mindful that Neil and everyone else here basically attempted an adaptation that people thought was impossible. They also need to make a show that appeals to a lot of people, not only the Sandman comic fans. So there are some fast cuts, expositions that fans dislike, the need for a villain of the season in Corinthian, and little expanded dialogue that probably would have appeased fans and newcomers alike. But it works. For the most part, it's pretty authentic, and some of the changes are even for the better and make sense. I'm just enjoying seeing how they've adapted it all and the creative changes they made. I enjoyed the first episode and I really hope the show goes the distance. They're incredible stories with relevant themes that I think we would all enjoy seeing come alive on the screen. Alright friends, that was the breakdown of the first episode of The Sandman, all the Easter eggs, differences between the comics and the show. If you're still watching, thank you so much, I hope you liked it. If you did, please like the video to support it, and be sure to subscribe to stay tuned for the upcoming analysis and much more. Let me know in the comments, I'm curious, what did you think of the first episode? I would also love to know if there were any Easter eggs and references that I potentially missed. Alright, the waking world, this was Heads and Tails, till next time.